Welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about the new deaconess that the Eastern Orthodox in Africa have ordained. Of course, this is one among several others that we've seen since 2016 in the Alexandrian Patriarchate. And let me show you the Facebook post that talks about this and has some pictures, and then let's talk about deaconesses in general. Here's the post. Angelic Molin of Harare, Zimbabwe, was ordained a deaconess in the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria in all Africa by His Eminence Metropolitan Seraphim of Zimbabwe in St. Nectarius Mission Parish at Waterfall. The historic event, without the approval and support of the Alexandrian Synod and His Beatitude Theodorus. The ordination of Deaconess Angelic was the culmination of efforts around the world to renew the ancient order of deaconesses in the Orthodox Church, and specifically for the unique needs of parishes in Zimbabwe. And here we can see a few pictures of her distributing Holy Communion after being ordained. Here's part of the ordination ceremony. Another picture distributing Holy Communion, and another one. So, let's talk about this. There isn't a whole lot more information about her. They say that more information is coming soon, and perhaps we'll talk about that when it comes. But I wanted to touch on this matter and talk about it, not only with what's going on with Eastern Orthodoxy on the matter, but also in the Catholic Church and what Pope Francis says about this, and also maybe take a look at a few historical sources that discuss this. In fact, we're going to take a look at a very old Roman liturgy service originating in Rome, where the service describes the ordination of female deacons, and there's a reference also to female presbyters. And so, of course, it's going to be debated, what their role was, what the function was, whether or not it's sacramental in nature or not. There's obviously going to be a debate there, but we'll talk about that. Okay, so let me also share the screen and show you that this really isn't a new phenomenon. We see this also with other Orthodox churches, not in communion with the Eastern Orthodox, however. This is the Armenian Orthodox Church. This is actually in Tehran. You can see a female deaconess here, Deaconess Atara. Here's a picture of about 5 deaconesses being ordained by the Eastern Orthodox Alexandrian Patriarch. And here is a deaconess of the Caliphian Sisterhood proclaiming the Holy Gospel during an Armenian liturgy in Constantinople at the Armenian Cathedral. So, of course, one of the roles of a deacon is to read the Holy Gospel in some cases, and also to in some instances, deliver homilies, administer Holy Communion, a number of things. And here we see an Armenian Orthodox, again, not in communion with the Eastern Orthodox, an Armenian Orthodox reading the Holy Gospel during a divine liturgy. You can see a little bit more here. This is in 2018. Again, a deaconess in the Armenian Orthodox Church, ordained in the Diocese of Tehran at St. Sarkis Mother Church, 2017. And so it's got a few photos there. This one's showing a little bit more about the other deaconess who read the Holy Gospel during the Armenian Orthodox liturgy at the cathedral. Let's talk a little bit about this one too. This is again where the Patriarch of Alexandria, an Eastern Orthodox patriarch, restored the role of women deaconesses in 2016. And again, here you can see 5 deaconesses being ordained. Again, it's a little unclear from their perspective. Do they consider them sacramentally ordained or not? But that might be a moot point since we're now seeing the deaconess that I just posted earlier. In fact, the one that's in the thumbnail there, we're seeing her performing roles that a sacramentally ordained deacon would fulfill. So perhaps it's a moot point, really, at this point, to even have the discussion of whether or not this is considered sacramental from an Eastern Orthodox perspective, when the function of a deacon, a sacramental deacon, seems to already be there in Eastern Orthodoxy at this point. It'll be interesting to see what the reactions are. Let's also briefly talk about this, just kind of in a wider and broader scope, about Eastern Orthodoxy and the role of women. Of course, this is a discussion that's taking place in the Catholic Church. What is the role of women in the church? Pope Francis has spoken a lot about this, and it's also a discussion that's taking place in Orthodoxy. Here's a brief article. Archbishop of America discussed expansion of roles of girls and women in church. And we've seen, Eastern Orthodox have, women altar servers and stuff like that. And then now also women deacons or deaconesses. Some try to make a distinction between the two. But again, I think that distinction is a distinction without a difference when it would seem that deaconesses are functioning as deacons. So the meeting that was shown here in the photo with the Archbishop Elpidophoros of America, the meeting underscored the significance of engaging girls and women in the church's life. St. Phoebe's Center representatives thanked the Archbishop for his instrumental role and blessing of the St. Phoebe Center to host their 10-year anniversary symposium. The St. Phoebe Center is kind of the one that documents a lot of this information about female deaconesses in the Orthodox churches. Elpidophoros gave his blessing to continue to involve girls and women in liturgical processions and work to expand their presence and visibility of women in the church. So, of course, again, Pope Francis has also spoken about, expanding women and their presence in the church without, of course, violating any dogmas of the faith. We'll actually take a look at an article in a moment where he says that, but you can see the same approach seems to be taken by some Eastern Orthodox as well. And, I found something interesting here. I was reading through the Catholic Encyclopedia, rereading through its article on deaconesses, and it notes this. It says, thus we read in Fortunatus that Saint Radegund was ordained deaconess by Saint Medard. So we see again the in the Latin right here, we see the language of ordaining a deaconess. Again, it's going to be debated on whether or not it's a sacramental ordination. There's a very large debate on that. But I do want to take a look at what it says here next. It says, so also the 9th century Ordo Romanus mentions as forming part of the papal procession female deaconesses and presbyters. And deaconesses are mentioned in the procession of Leo III in the 9th century. Further, the Anglo-Saxon Leofric Missal in the 11th century still retained a prayer for the making of deaconesses, which appears in the form of Exaudi Domine, Hear, O Lord, common to both deacons and deaconesses. So it seems that this notion of female deaconesses lasted to one degree or another in the Latin Rite into the second millennium. And from what I can tell, whether we're speaking about deaconesses in the Latin Rite or in the Eastern churches, it seems that there's a very diverse and wide range of functions that they had. Of course, we see deaconesses mentioned in scripture in Romans 16, verses 1 through 2. Um, and you have very early on female deaconesses in the early church. It seems that their role was to assist in baptisms. And you start to look further in later centuries in the early and patristic period, and it seems like there was kind of a wide range of their functions. In some cases, they served liturgical functions, and in other cases, there were canons forbidding that. In some places, they preached homilies, in other places, that's forbidden. And so it seems like there was kind of a wide range of what their functions were, whether we're speaking about East or West. And the Catholic Encyclopedia article here speaks a little bit about that, but not in a great amount of detail. It says, we hear of them presiding over assemblies of women, reading the epistle and gospel, distributing the Eucharist to nuns, lighting the candles, burning incense in the thuribles, adorning the sanctuary, and anointing the sick. That's a pretty interesting one. But it says all these things must be regarded as abuses. Perhaps from their angle that was considered an abuse, but there were plenty of other people in the first millennium that didn't consider it an abuse. And so it kind of depends on from whose perspective. Now let's talk about that Ordo Romanus 9 that it mentioned earlier, the ninth Ordo Romanus. This is actually found online, and it's described here. Let me maybe try to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to read the text describing the ordination of a female deaconess in Rome. The date and composition of this document has been investigated, and the conclusions are that the substance of the Ordo was drawn up in the time of Pope Constantine I, so in the year 708, and underwent some revision under Pope Stephen III, 752. A point of great interest is the mention of deaconesses and female presbyters. We'll limit our discussion to, deaconesses and not presbyterae, and the role and function there. So it starts here. The Pope stands at his throne, laying hands on the heads of each of them, that is the candidates for the diaconate, and blesses and ordains them. The archdeacon approaches, bringing the diaconal stoles from the confessional, where they had been put on the previous day. He puts these on them, and the Pope vests them with the diaconal dalmatic, so that they stand fully vested. Those from their midst who are going to be just deacons take their diaconal vestments with them. Then the blessing of those who will be priests is completed. Then they move down from the papal throne to the altar area, and immediately one of the newly ordained deacons reads the gospel, and they all serve at the Mass itself, each according to his office. The Pope, however, takes the complete offerings and gives it to each of the newly ordained priests, and so they receive communion until day 8. At the end, when the Mass has been properly finished, the faithful from various regions belonging to the titled churches stand ready with candles and thuribles to receive their own priests. The Pope, on his part, gives them priestly vestments and equipment for Mass, gold or silver, wine, bread, and oil. When the priests leave the Basilica of St. Peter's, each is preceded by some 30 candles with thuribles. The priest himself, however, sits on a gray horse, while the people walking ahead or following along sing God's glory. And then it has a section, similarly, their women, deaconesses or presbyterae, who are blessed or ordained on the same day. Of course, there's going to be a debate on whether or not this is sacramental ordination or some other kind of ordination, like a blessing, but not an ordination. So again, very, very hot debate there on how this was seen in the early church, east, west, and so on. It continues, the squares of the city through which they, the priests, will be passing are decorated with laurel and banners and so on. And so, very small section. Similarly, they're women deaconesses. Similarly to what? Similarly to what we had read previously with the laying on of hands on the heads of each of the candidates. Now, we do see the notion of the laying on of hands in these ceremonies for deaconesses in the patristic era, in the first millennium. We do see that. The question then is that sacramental or is this something else? What's the interpretation behind the laying on of hands? Well, it actually, there is a very brief prayer for the ordination of deaconesses in the West that has survived in the Hadrianum Sacramentary of 786, which it has a link to. So if you click on it, it has it right here. So again, this is 8th century Roman ordination prayer for deaconesses. And it's described as prayer to make a woman deacon. Here's the prayer. Hear, O Lord, our petition, and send down on this your maidservant here the spirit of your ordination. So we see the notion of the spirit being sent down. It's described as ordination, so that since you have conferred on her your heavenly office, she may obtain favor with your majesty and may present to others the example of a good life through Christ our Lord, and so on. And so again, there's a huge debate on interpretations of all this, but there's just kind of an example of what one prayer would sound like in the Roman liturgy. Now let's briefly just discuss what Pope Francis has said about women deaconesses. This is from a CNA article, Pope Francis on women deacons. Holy orders is reserved for men. He says, Pope Francis reaffirmed the impossibility of women becoming priests or even modern church deacons in an interview for a book released on Tuesday in Italy. This is back in 2023. The Pope's answers to questions about women's roles in the church were included in the book El Pastor. The book, whose title means the shepherd, was released on October 24th, 2023. The Italian edition is titled You Are Not Alone, Challenges, Answers, and Hopes. About the possibility of women deacons, Francis pointed out that the diaconate is the first degree of holy orders in the Catholic Church, followed by the priesthood and finally the episcopate. He said he formed commissions in 2016 and 2020 to study the question further. After a study in the 1980s by the International Theological Commission established that the role of deaconesses in the early church was comparable to the benedictions of abbesses. In response to a question about why is he against the female priesthood, Francis told Argentine journalists that it is a theological problem. In other words, it's a theological issue for his reasons against female priesthood. I think we would undermine the essence of the church if we considered only the priestly ministry, that is, the ministerial way. In other words, he wants to say, look, we shouldn't get so caught up in just ministry of the priesthood. There are many ways that women can serve the church and minister in the church outside of the priesthood. He says the fact that the woman does not access ministerial life is not a deprivation because of her place is much more important. He said, I think we err in our catechesis in explaining these things, and ultimately we fall back on an administrative criterion that does not work in the long run. On the other hand, with respect to the charism of women, I want to say very clearly, that from my personal experience, they have a great ecclesial intuition. Asked about women's ordination, bringing more people closer to the church, and optional priestly celibacy, helping with priests' shortages, Francis said he does not share these views. He says, Lutherans ordain women, but still few go to church. So in other words, look at the Lutherans. They ordain women and few people are going to their churches. So I don't think that just ordaining women is somehow going to bring in more people, is what he's saying. He says their priests can marry, but despite that, they can't grow the number of ministers. The problem is cultural. We should not be naive and think that programmatic changes will bring us the solution. Well said. Mere ecclesiastical reforms do not serve to solve underlying issues. Rather, paradigmatic changes are what is needed, he added, pointing to his 2019 letter to the German Catholics for further consideration on the issue. So you'll notice, however, the question of female deaconesses being sacramentally ordained, it does not appear that Francis is in favor of that or believes that can happen from reading this. However, is there some other kind of role for women in the church? He wants to say yes. Now, again, in the Latin Rite in the Catholic Church, there's a pretty large debate on the role of deaconesses, is it sacramental or not. But from what I can tell with this newest ordination of a female deacon or a deaconess in Eastern Orthodoxy, it appears, at least for the Eastern Orthodox, that distinction has become moot. And again, I know a lot of Eastern Orthodox try to make a distinction between a sacramental ordination of a deaconess versus a non-sacramental deaconess, but if they're performing liturgical functions in the same liturgical functions as a male deacon who is sacramentally ordained, which we can see this new deaconess is, then that is a distinction without a difference because they're doing the same thing. It would be like saying, okay, well, we can't have women priests, but then you go and ordain a woman priest and have them, celebrate the Eucharist and confect the Eucharist, but then say, but we don't have women priests. It's a different thing. But it's like, okay, but if they're performing the same function, it seems like it's the same thing at that point. So for me, it appears that there's still a debate taking place in the Catholic Church on what exactly deaconesses were, what was an abuse, what wasn't. Whereas it seems like there's a little less wiggle room now in Eastern Orthodoxy with this new phenomenon that's taking place here. Now, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of Eastern Orthodox who disagree with it. It'll be interesting to see how this pans out in discussions between Eastern Orthodox bishops. We'll see how that goes. Mahovel, thank you for the super chat. What is relation of deaconesses and female monastics? If I'm not wrong, abbesses in some parts of history has extreme power. Yeah, and if you take a look at the Catholic Encyclopedia article on deaconesses, it talks a little bit about that and kind of draws some parallels between the two. Thank you, Matthew, for the super chat. Wingegaards should not be trusted. He's a notorious dissenter. Perhaps. I'm not saying that any of this should be somehow taken for granted or taken at face value. You're welcome to do more research and find out if there is some misinformation there. And love to hear from you if that's the case. I say always consider everything critically. But I will say this, just because someone is a notorious heretic doesn't mean that they can't say something that's true, right? So if somebody's translating a document or something like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that their translation is erroneous or the document doesn't actually exist. You would rather than say this person is a notorious heretic, you would want to argue, hey, that document's not authentic or this is a bad translation, because the orthodoxy of a particular person is irrelevant to what I was just bringing out in showing the ninth Ordo Romanus and the Hadrianum sacramentum, um, or sacramentary. So, yeah, I would just consider that. But I appreciate the support and that super chat there. All right. Well, hey, everybody, I hope y'all enjoyed this. Hopefully, y'all found it helpful and also intriguing. I sure thought it was fascinating when I saw this. Perhaps more to come as the situation continues to develop. All right. Hey, hit that like button and the subscribe button. And if you want to support this channel, especially, great way to do it is visiting patreon.com/reason in theology or reasonintheology.locals.com. And you can support the channel there, and you'll also get access to plenty of extra content. All right. We'll see you later. God bless. Hey, friends, do you want others to discover why the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus established? And do you want to help people make sense of all the confusion in the Catholic Church today? Help contribute to this mission by supporting Reason and Theology at patreon.com/Reason and Theology. By doing so, you'll also get access to exclusive content for patrons only. Also, if you want to deepen your faith, there are free ebooks and even courses that you can sign up for by visiting reason.podia.com. Hey friends, I'm now teaching as an adjunct professor at Catholic Polytechnic University, and I am excited to announce that we will be offering the first ever Magisterial Studies Certificate program. It consists of 3 courses: an introduction to the magisterium, councils, dogmas, canons, and decrees, and evaluating magisterial teachings. If you want to further your education and learn more about Catholic teaching authority, this is the program for you. Check out catholicpolytechnic.org and click on the certificate tab at the top to sign up for the course today.